3 in the morning. You can hear the hull groaning before you feel it move. The vessel rolls hard to port, holds for 2 long seconds, then rolls back. Somewhere below, a loose tool slides across the steel floor and clangs into the wall. This is hour 19 of your shift. You have 40 minutes left. Outside, the wave that just rolled you was probably around 8 meters. A rogue wave the week before was twice that. The water it came from is about 3 degrees Celsius. If you fell in wearing what you're currently wearing, you would have somewhere between 10 and 20 minutes before your body stopped responding to your own brain. Welcome to life on an Icelandic fishing vessel, working among the most dangerous fishing grounds on Earth. More than 2,400 Icelandic fishermen have been documented as having drowned at sea across the country's history. The real number is higher, and yet every single night of the year, hundreds of men are still out there, hauling nets up through black water, because it has been the only way Iceland has ever made a real living. To understand why these waters are what they are, you have to look at a map. Iceland sits almost exactly where 2 oceans argue with each other. Warm water pushes up from the south on the Gulf Stream. Cold water pushes down from the Arctic. They meet right around the island. When warm air hits cold air over open ocean, you get weather. When the warm and cold water underneath them are also colliding, you get weather systems that build faster and hit harder than almost anywhere else on the planet. But what makes these waters valuable is the same thing that makes them deadly. Nutrients get churned up from deep water by those colliding currents. Plankton blooms explode. Small fish come to eat the plankton, big fish come to eat the small fish, and the cod, haddock, and redfish that Iceland's entire economy rests on spend their lives in this buffet. A large share of Iceland's export earnings still comes from fish, more than any other single industry. That means the weather doesn't get a vote. When the quota opens, the boats go out. In January. In February. In the middle of the North Atlantic winter, when daylight lasts 4 hours, and the sea is the color of wet slate. The boat you'd be working on probably isn't what you picture when someone says fishing boat. A modern Icelandic trawler is closer to a small factory than a rowboat. The biggest ones are longer than a football field. They have dynamic positioning systems that can hold the boat steady in a storm using just the thrust of the engines. The bridge looks like a flight deck. One captain working out of Grindavik runs his vessel with computer screens showing the seafloor in 3D, water temperature at depth, weather 3 days out, and 15 years of historical data on where the fish were on any given day in any given season. Below him, 7 men are running what is essentially a small processing plant. There's a gutting line. There's a filleting machine, usually a Botter 182, which can put through roughly 145 fish a minute when it's running well. There's a freezer hold that can store hundreds of tons. There's CCTV on every piece of machinery because if someone loses a hand in the fish grinder, the captain needs to know about it in the next 5 seconds. And there's one thing there isn't. There isn't a doctor. On a trawler working 100 miles off the West Fjords in January, the nearest hospital might be 4 hours away, assuming a helicopter can even get airborne. If you're seriously hurt, your life depends on the captain, a first aid kit, and a satellite phone. That's modernity. That's the easy part. The hard part is the schedule. A typical trip runs anywhere from 4 days to 3 weeks, depending on how fast the nets fill and how far from shore the boat has to travel. Inside that trip, there is no such thing as a weekend. There is barely such a thing as a day. The crew works in shifts, usually 6 on and 6 off, rotating around the clock. That sounds reasonable until you realize what happens in those 6 off hours. You come off the deck soaked. You strip out of rain gear that weighs 15 pounds because it's saturated with fish slime, salt water, and whatever was in the last hold. You eat. You try to shower if there's time. You crawl into a bunk that is maybe 7 feet long and 3 feet wide, in a cabin you share with 1 or 2 other men, with the engine vibrating through the bulkhead and the hull slamming into swells every few seconds. Then your alarm goes off, and you do it again. On a good boat in calm weather, you might get 5 hours of actual sleep. On a bad boat in rough weather, when the nets are coming up heavy and the skipper wants to stay on the fish, you might get one. Crews have reported going 36 hours with almost nothing, and while you're sleep deprived, you're doing something your body was never designed to do. You're standing on a floor that is tilting in 2 directions at once while operating machinery that can remove fingers. Your wrists are cramping from grabbing fish that weigh 10, 15, 20 pounds. Your back is locked up from leaning over a conveyor belt for 12 straight hours. Your hands are always cold and never dry. Small cuts from fish bones and gutting knives don't heal properly because they never get the chance to dry out. But the money is real. A crew member on a good boat, on a good trip, working a good quota, can take home in 3 weeks what a shoreside worker in Reykjavik takes home in 3 months. Icelandic fishermen are compensated on a share system, which means when the catch is good, everyone on board gets a percentage of what the fish sells for. A captain on a successful vessel can clear 6 figures in a season. And because you're at sea with nowhere to spend it, most of that money goes straight into the bank. If the work didn't kill you, the sea still might. The North Atlantic winter produces weather that experienced mariners from other oceans don't really have a reference for. Waves don't come from one direction. They come from several, stacking on top of each other, hitting the hull from angles the boat wasn't designed to handle. Wind speeds over 50 knots are routine. Wind speeds over 70 knots happen every winter. Ice builds up on the rails and the superstructure fast enough that crews have to break it off with mallets to keep the boat from becoming top-heavy and rolling. And then there are the rogue waves. For a long time, scientists didn't believe rogue waves were real. Fishermen and merchant sailors had been reporting them for centuries. Waves 3 times higher than everything around them, coming out of nowhere and disappearing just as fast. They were dismissed as exaggeration until oil platforms in the North Sea started getting hit by waves measuring over 30 meters. Now we know they happen. We still don't entirely know why. The waters around Iceland are one of the places they happen most often. Stories like this one are what this channel does. If you want more of them, hit subscribe. In February of 1925, a storm hit the fishing grounds off the Vestfjords. Most of the vessels working the area made it home. 2 didn't. The trawler Leifur Hepni, named after Leif the Lucky, went down with every man aboard. The Field Marshal Robertson went down the same night. 63 Icelanders and 6 Englishmen drowned. Between them, they left behind 69 children without fathers. On the day of the memorial service in Reykjavik, the entire country stopped. Every ship in every harbor went quiet. Every business closed. Every road fell still for 10 minutes, because in 1925 there was almost no Icelandic family that hadn't buried someone to the sea, and the ones that hadn't knew they were just waiting. That was one storm, one night. If you walk through almost any coastal town in Iceland today, you will eventually find a monument, usually near the harbor. Sometimes it's a bronze figure of a fisherman looking out to sea. Sometimes it's a wall with names carved into it. Genealogical researchers have documented over 2,400 confirmed Icelandic drownings. The people maintaining that list are the first to say the real number is much higher. For most of Icelandic history, if a boat didn't come back, nobody wrote down exactly why. The men were just gone. The widows understood. The children understood. It was the deal. The most remarkable survival story Iceland has from modern times happened in 1984. A fishing boat called Helisi Viv E 503 capsized about 5 kilometers off Heimaey in the Westman Islands. The water temperature was around 5 degrees Celsius. The air was below freezing. 5 men went into the sea. 4 of them died in the next 40 minutes from the cold alone. The 5th man was 23 years old. His name was Gudlaugur Friðþórsson. He swam. In jeans, a shirt, a sweater, and no shoes, in water that should have killed him in 20 minutes, he kept swimming toward the lights of Heimaey for 6 hours. When he finally reached the coast, he found himself under a cliff with nowhere to land. So he swam along the cliff for another kilometer until he could climb out onto a field of sharp volcanic rock. Barefoot, bleeding, he walked 2 kilometers to the nearest farmhouse and asked for help. Researchers at the University of Iceland and at London Hospital Medical College later examined his body fat composition. They found it was 2 to 3 times thicker than a normal person's, and the tissue structure itself more closely resembled the insulating fat of a seal than the fat of a human. A film was made about him. The annual memorial swim in the Westman Islands is still named after him. He is one of very few men ever to walk out of that water alive. The obvious question at this point is why anyone still does this. Iceland is not a poor country anymore. The same nation that was one of the poorest in Europe 100 years ago is now one of the richest per capita. There are safer jobs. There are easier jobs. The sea doesn't have a monopoly on income anymore, but ask an Icelandic fisherman why he's still going, and you usually get the same kind of answer. My father did it. My grandfather did it. This is what my family does. Fishing in Iceland isn't a job in the way that most jobs are jobs. It's closer to a kind of identity that has been passed down through the same harbor towns for 4 or 5 generations. One man who runs a major Icelandic fishing company is named after a skipper who died at 24, saving his crew. His grandfather disappeared at sea on a boat's maiden voyage in 1943. His father lost his own father and uncle to the sea at the age of 12. When he went to navigation school himself, he ended up in the same class as the son of the man he was named after, who was also training to go to sea. That's not an unusual story in Iceland. That's the industry. There's also the money, which is real and substantial. Icelandic fishermen on the big boats are genuinely well paid by the standards of physical labor anywhere in the world. But nobody becomes a deckhand on a North Atlantic trawler for the money alone. If the money were the only thing, every crew would be full of strangers. The crews are not full of strangers. They're full of cousins. The last piece is harder to explain if you haven't done it. There is a specific kind of pride attached to work that most people couldn't do. Coming off a 3-week trip in January, standing on the dock in a coastal town where the air smells like fuel and fish, unloading 30 tons of cod onto a truck that's going to feed families in Madrid and Milan and New York, knowing you got it out of water that most of the planet would be frightened to even look at from shore, is a feeling that doesn't really map to any other kind of labor. The money is a bonus. The job itself is the thing. The statistics tell you that all of this has gotten safer. Mandatory safety training, better vessels, airborne rescue teams available 24 hours a day, and constant satellite tracking of every registered boat in Icelandic waters. Between 1980 and 2005, the fatality rate in the Icelandic fishing fleet dropped steadily, year after year. Fishermen today are much less likely to die at work than fishermen were a single generation ago. And yet, this is still one of the most dangerous jobs in the developed world. A country of less than 400,000 people loses working fishermen most years, not always in dramatic mass casualty events like the 1925 storm, usually in ones and twos. A man goes over the side when a net snags. A wave takes someone off the deck at night. A boat runs into ice it didn't see in time. The names get added to the monuments in the harbor towns. Another family absorbs another empty chair at the kitchen table. What Iceland has done, more than anything else, is accept that. The country built its modern wealth by sending its sons into water that the rest of the world considers unsurvivable, and it kept doing it even after it no longer strictly had to. There's a stubborn refusal built into that choice, a refusal to stop doing the hard thing just because the hard thing is hard. If you're ever in Reykjavik in early June, during the first weekend when the country celebrates the Day of the Fisherman, and you see the whole harbor turn out for a festival that is half celebration and half wake for the ones who didn't come home, that's what you're looking at. You're looking at a country that has been having this exact conversation with the sea for more than 1,000 years and hasn't decided to stop yet. Here's the question I keep coming back to on this one. If you were born into that industry, if the job was already waiting for you by the time you were 16, and the money was good, and your father did it, and your grandfather did it, and everyone you knew did it, would you have gone? Let me know down below.